to the RockFit Files. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. And kicking off 2023, it makes sense to kind of look at where you are in life, where you want to be, and the steps it's going to take to get there. And my guest this time around, Steve Gwenin, we connected through Facebook because he's got an interesting group called Work Less, Surf More. And there's something about that, if you're a surfer, that just rings true in your ears, because if you have a passion, that's what you want to follow through with. So we're going to find out a little bit more about Steve, his community, what he does, and how he's helping surfers work less and surf more. So Steve, welcome to the RockFit Files.
Hey, Rocky, how are you?
Doing great. In fact, I'm trying to live by your credo. I'm trying to work less and surf more. And I gotta say, it works out well for me. I don't know if you've got any other guys that would put in some kind of kudos or give you any endorsements or whatever, but it's working for me. How are you doing it? And first of all, how did this concept arise? How did you build this community?
It really came out of sort of an accident, I guess. I was, I don't know if accident is fair. I was working pretty hard. I had a job as a CEO. It was an organization that I'd helped to found. And I got involved with it in the early days. And I went out to Mexico and I was doing coral reef research and driving boats and skipping out to surf when I could. We were living in the jungle and really sort of living the life, living out my passions. And it went well and it grew and it developed and it turned into a bigger organization. And I think the same as most people's sort of career journeys, you go from something that you really love and you're passionate about to getting sort of promoted and working higher up and having staff to manage and getting an HR department and policies and sitting in a boardroom looking at graphs. And I got to the stage where I'd been doing that for sort of 20 years and my kids were young. And I realized it was no longer for me. Like I loved what the organization did. Like it was really conservation minded. We did a lot of conservation work. It gave me amazing adventures all over the world, amazing experiences. We helped a lot of people, but ultimately, and maybe selfishly, I decided I didn't want to be in the boardroom looking at graphs and numbers anymore. And that actually I wasn't the best person to do it, especially in that mindset. So I thought the organization needed someone else and someone different, and I needed to go and disappear and focus on what I was really passionate about. So I did that, and I didn't know what it would be. I literally sort of jumped off a cliff. A lot of people say, well, you've got to develop, your side hustle and develop that and get your passion and get it moving and know you could do it. But when you're busy, when you're working all the time, it's really hard to do that, to find the time to actually put the side hustle together and develop it and grow it like I was really committed to the other organization. So effectively I jumped off the cliff and I just went surfing a lot whilst I figured out what my next step would be.
Well, that initial step though, I mean, that leap of faith, if you want to call it, that's a very scary thing. For a lot of people to just leave behind something that maybe you felt comfortable, maybe there was a lot of responsibility weighing on your shoulders, the financial kind of commitments or burdens, economic insecurity, whatever you want to call it. I mean,
all of that.
Yeah, right. How did you just throw up your hands and say, I'm going to do it come hell or high water? Or what was it that gave you the courage to take that first step?
I think the first thing I'd like to say is 2 years of procrastination, of actually knowing it and not doing absolutely anything about it. Mm-hmm. And within those 2 years, I think my enjoyment of it got less. My determination to do something about it became more. And in the end, I decided it's the only route I can take. I have to change it. I'm not happy. I'm not great for the organization. I'm not great for my kids. I'm doing multiple things badly, poorly, and I need to make a change. So, but it was scary jumping off the cliff for sure. And it had taken me 2 years of completely trying not to and trying can I figure this out? Can I make some small changes, book out a bit of time to go surfing in the morning? Lots of small efforts for small changes, which never last really. They have a sort of a good short-term effect and then fade away. And I realized I need to make a big change. So that's what I did. And how did I do it? It just came down to it came down to confidence. It came down to support from my family. I think they could see that actually, you're going to be happier. And I think they had a lot of belief in me, which gave me more belief in myself as well. I was like, yeah, you know what, when I was 20, I'd have done this, and I did multiple similar things time and time again. But as you're older with more responsibility, it gets harder to do it. So I tried to embrace that young Steve and just go for it.
Well, I think we fall into this pattern too, just in general, where there is this comfort zone in which we are finding ourselves falling into, and change requires getting outside of that comfort zone in all aspects of life. Whether it's learning something new, it's uncomfortable to realize you don't know something and then have to go forth and learn it before it becomes comfortable. Changing patterns or routines, that's something that's quite uncomfortable. So we all kind of gravitate to comfort. And unfortunately, that means in ways stagnation. It means an unrealized dream or unaccomplished dream and so on. So how do you, because this is something that you're passionate about, is encouraging others to kind of follow suit with the path that you have found joy with, and that is kind of reducing that stress of work and so on, and exploring your passion. So what is it what are the steps? Are there steps, first of all, or is there a process? How does that look like?
There's multiple different sort of processes and tools that you can use. I think probably the biggest one, and I think you mentioned it at the very beginning, is figuring out what you really want out of life. And I think no one really asks us this. We've got a general sense of it, but you don't sit down with your wife or your partner or your buddies down the bar, and no one asks you, what do you really want from life? And what else? And what do you really want to achieve when you're on your deathbed, looking back at your life? What are you going to regret? Where do you want your life to go? And what's going to make you happy on your deathbed when you're lying there looking back at your life and say, really, I made the most of it? And those are the sorts of questions that no one really asks you. So when I'm working with clients about it now, that's exactly where we start. Like, what do you actually want? And it's amazing the amount of people who don't really know. They know what they don't want. They don't want to be working 60 hours a day. But they don't know what they do want. They don't know what the alternative is, or they don't know what the alternative is, and they don't know how to get there once they even figure that out. Like, I could do that. They don't know what the options are almost. But I think
that in itself is uncomfortable, wouldn't you say? I mean, just trying to figure it out. I'm just thinking about it myself, and I'm going, oh, I can feel myself getting impatient, frustrated. There's some emotions that boil to the surface because I'm not comfortable. But knowing that this is part of the process of having to get uncomfortable to get outside of where you are is probably a big part of it too. Would you agree?
Completely. And I would say that we say you don't have those conversations with your friends down the pub or down the park for a reason. It is uncomfortable and you've never really thought about it. And actually a lot of those conversations involve quite lengthy silences, and you can sit and watch people thinking because they've never really thought about it before. And so the easy answer, especially in conversations where there's surfers, is I just want to surf every day. But normally that's not completely true, and it may feel completely true, like that's what you'd love to do, but actually you also love your family, so you want to spend some time with them. You also, like it or not, you do need some money to thrive, to survive, and then maybe to thrive and go on a trip as well. So how much? So you have to get really specific about, okay, what does my ideal life, given where I am and those relationships, etc., what does that actually look like? What do I really want? And it might be you want to leave your wife and move to Costa Rica on your own and surf every day. But generally, that's not actually the case when you really question people. So I think we have these dreams, and a lot of them are emotional dreams, but digging into the reality of what does that dream actually look like for you now, given all the experiences that you've had and where you are right now. Where can you take that? What's your actual surf dream? And then once you've got that identified, it's then figuring out, all right, how committed are you to it and how can you get there?
So we're a culture of stories. Now, I'd love to hear a couple, like anecdotal kind of experiences amongst your community members that have pursued this in a successful way.
Yeah, no, and it's quite incredible. So the first client that I ever worked with fully was actually going through exactly the same journey that I'd been through. He'd got his own organization. He was a founder. He was the CEO. He was managing it. He was hands-on every single day. He got young kids as well, but he was in there every single day. He was working in the yard. He was really micromanaging everyone. And he felt he just had to be. And I went through a very similar experience. You feel guilty not doing it, and you feel like no one else can quite get this right, and no one can get that right, and I need to be there on top of it and really micromanage. And you've got to be first in and last out, and really sort of lead from the front. And then a year later, his situation had completely changed. Like it'd been very clear: Fridays I'm not going in. I'm not going in the yard anymore. I'm not going to get involved in the sales. Like we'd sort of filtered all of that out, delegated it out, and he'd stepped back. He was spending more time with his kids, more time surfing, and was overall much happier with his life as well. But I think it takes those decision moments, and quite often, some of the people I'm working with have actually had those events in their life where they've had a diagnosis, something extreme, something terminal has come up, and they've had that diagnosis, and they've been forced to make that change. They realised. But a lot of people almost have to wait until that point to go, actually, is this, if you've only got 5 years left, you're going to make a bunch of different decisions to if you think you've got 20 years left. So when I ask people what they want, one of the routes towards getting that is, all right, let's pretend in theory, you've only got 5 years left. What are you going to change about your life right now?
Oh, I like that because as I usually kind of comment about change, when people ask me about how is it, what is the underlying purpose or reasoning or motivation, and it boils down to two potentials. One is inspiration and the other is desperation. And what you've just described is taking somebody and creating inspiration through a thought process that is more of desperation,
Exactly.
shrinking down the amount of time you have available. It gives you a sense that, okay, I'm going to have some desperation, but that's actually quite inspiring. So I like how you turn that in. And how does that work on average for the people you work with?
I think it works really well in helping them identify what they would like to change in life. But there's still that obstacles about, right now I've decided what I'd like to change. How do I actually do it? And I think people are really blocked by a number of things. And they think that they're practical problems often, but in reality, they're more mindset problems, that they could do it if they really wanted to. So it's making sure that thing that they said they want is actually true. Like, does it actually align with who they are, who they think they are, what their values are, and what their purpose are? So sort of taking it on that 5-year level and saying, let's pretend you've got 5 years left. What are your regrets? What could your regrets be on your deathbed? It's also like, what do you want on your gravestone? What's actually your purpose in life? Like what where do you want your life to go? And really tying it to purpose, to identity, to values. Like for me, I've tied surfing more, which is effectively just playing in the sea, having fun. I've tied it to exercise, I've tied it to mental health, and I've tied that to being a good father and a good husband for as long as I possibly can. And that's sort of what I want on my gravestone. So when I'm standing on I call it the deck of debate, on the wooden deck, looking at marginal conditions, I could go in and there's a whole bunch of reasons that I shouldn't, in theory, like it's not really that good and I've got a lot of things to do and I've got to get this done and that done, and I went in yesterday and it might be better tomorrow. And I think all surfers do that, but we don't often have many things on the other shoulder, like the good angel or the bad angel, depending on your perspective, saying, yeah, you should go in, come on, just get in there. And all of a sudden that angel is saying, well, actually, if you want to be a good dad and you want to be a good father, you've got to be healthy and fit, and you need to be a bit of fun, and you need to be a bit less stressed, and you should go for a surf. Go on, get in there. So you're balancing it out a little bit more. And if you can give enough good arguments to go in and really tie it to your purpose, then those challenges that we all face start to fall away. You could leave your job. You could ask for some flexi time. You could do all these things that when you're stuck, you think are impossible if you really wanted to. So it's clarifying how much do you really want it, and does it line up with who you are? And I would go on to say, Rocky, for some people it doesn't. Some people are, oh yeah, I want to surf all the time, and you dig into it, and actually, like, no, their identity, how they think of themselves, isn't really that person that goes surfing that much. They're happy going, twice a month. That's fine. They're a CEO. That's how they think of themselves. That's how they identify. They're, a businessman. They don't want to say no to new projects and tasks. And when you really dig into it, that's what you sort of uncover. And you go, okay, that's cool, but you do want to surf a bit. So how much? Let's just figure that out and get that in place, because that you'll be able to do. If you're aiming for a goal that doesn't actually align with who you are and what you really want, you're very unlikely to succeed. You probably have some of that in the gym.
Yes, very much so. I mean, everything you're saying can be easily transferred over into what I'm doing here with people, because they're trying to improve their life in one way or another, and they need help with the change, the motivation, as well as the roadblocks. So,
Yeah.
and I'm curious about that too. You were talking about the deck of what did you call it, the deck of indecision, or
the deck of debate.
the deck of debate. I
Horse.
found myself standing on the cliff on the deck of debate many times.
Sure.
I will say this: if I listen to the voice that just says, "Oh, just go get it, go surf," more often than not, by not listening to the other things that I need to take care of, the waves don't come the way they should. The surf session is not nearly what it should have been. So I realized that in order for me to say yes on that deck of debate, I need to come up with a plan to handle the other things that are on my shoulder. But so that's a tool that I found to get around these roadblocks, going, okay, well, I just need to kind of logically plan this out. If I go surf right now, then I know I need to handle these things later. But in regards to roadblocks, detours, like, how do you get around those? How do you remove them? How do you create a cleaner path that doesn't have so many bumps for your community?
I think there's a number of things to look at, and I would say everyone's situation is completely different. So there's no sort of one size fits all. I don't think. Not that I've been able to identify yet. Like, the problems are different, although there's some similarities. I think they're all quite unique. Everyone's life unique, everyone's experiences are unique, so their mindset's also unique as well. Coming out of that, what they believe about themselves or the world around them is different. But I think mostly from the people that I've spoken to and seen their experiences, first off, they really need to look at the environment that they're in, and that can include all sorts of things, where they live, their family, their friends. Like, quite often, and again, I'll relate it back to the gym. Maybe we'll cover both there, because I think it applies to any problem. Who you living with, who are your friends, what are they doing? If you want to be fit and healthy, if you've got a bunch of unhealthy friends that are drinking and smoking and partying, you're unlikely to be really successful in the gym or get really fit or go surfing a lot, because you're going to get dragged into that. So that environment that they're living in, I think, is really important. Like, what's good for that, and how does that contribute, and what are there challenges in there? And if there's challenges in there, look at those and think about changing those. So it's sort of looking at each situation, the environment first, and what needs to change. If this is your goal and that's what you want to achieve, what could you consider changing about that environment?
Well, that makes sense that you would build a community with like-minded individuals. I mean, it's sort of built-in support right there.
Yeah, I think that is a really big part of it. And I think we've all seen people that, we've all got one of those mates that gives us a call and harasses us to go surfing, and actually persuades us to go surfing, when sometimes we might not otherwise. So I think sort of, and it's not just the mates, it's partners, it's kids, it's where we live, it's how we live, like that. I think all of that contributes. And then it's our own behavior as well. What do we actually need to change? Like, if you want to achieve a goal, let's say it's surfing more, what are you doing that stops that? So a client that I'm working with at the moment really struggles to say no to people. And I think this is such a classic part of why people don't surf as much as they'd like to surf, is that they say yes. People ask them for help. And I actually think most of it comes down to trying to help people, and then people asking you and then saying yes. And once you've said yes a few times, it becomes expected. and you say yes, you will help them. You will help the staff with their job that you're paying them to do. You'll help the family. You'll do the shopping, and you'll fix this. You'll go there. You'll do that, and that feels really good. And we all want to help. We want to be liked. We want to be included in society, in community. But sometimes that's at the detriment of ourselves, and we're actually, because of all of that, we can become unhappy and not actually showing up with our kids, with our partners, with the ones that are really important to us in the way that we'd like to. And we're not necessarily being the person that we'd like to be. We might be helping, but we might not be that inspiring.
We're going to just take a break from our conversation with Steve for a moment, because I want to tell you about a course that I'll be teaching in West Warwick, Rhode Island this January, the 21st, a one-day course on closed-chain biomechanics. Now, if you happen to be a movement specialist, a manual therapist, physical therapist, or even athletic trainer, and you want to learn more truly about how the body moves in space as it lands on the ground and pushes off, this is the course for you. You can go to my website, rockysnyder.com, and while you're there, also register for the two-day course that follows that one in Hingham, Massachusetts, where we'll be focusing on the upper body. Now, this may be something for surfers to get a sense of how your shoulders should be moving, but really, tell your trainers or your massage therapist or whomever that this is a course that is a game changer and will get you to the next level. Again, rockysnyder.com. Go to courses and workshops and then hit down to events. You can register for both courses there. All right, back to the action.
Okay, so with this group of like-minded individuals that have developed over the course of time that you've been going with Work Less, Surf More, what is that like? Is it in person? Is it mainly online via social media? How do you bring such people together, and how do you create such a supportive community?
It started very much face to face down the local break. My kids surf. I was there on the weekends. I'd sometimes rock up during the week for a short session, and then all of a sudden I was there a lot. and my friends were like, "What's happened?" And I told them, the story about jumping off the cliff, and they were like, one of them turned around and just said, "You're an inspiration to us all." Like, we should all be doing this. So off the back of that, I actually started helping a few people locally and chatting to them. And I realized that there are the tools and techniques, and coaching can actually help people. And there's a lot of people that are struggling with this issue. So then I put that online really just out of interest's sake, and almost testing for the company that I also developed, which is Surfers Life Club. But I put that online and sort of invited a few people in. And it was just really, really natural. People were like, "I love this topic. I love what you're talking about. I love the idea of sort of that there are tools and techniques and some processes that can be applied." And the biggest thing that's come out of it, Rocky, is just the support everyone's given each other. So there's a real mix of surfers involved in it. There's guys that have lived the dream and are still living the dream. They've spent their entire life surfing. They haven't worked hard, they've worked, but not a lot. To be careful in case any are listening. And then there's other guys that that have surfed for ages and then stopped surfing and are there now. Some of them living inland, some living by the coast but too busy to actually get in the sea. And then there's guys at the newer end of the journey who are only just sort of starting out. Like, I've discovered surfing. I love it. I want to change things and spend a lot more time doing it. Like, how can you go about that? So, and all of those people are sort of supporting each other. So there's a mix of fantastic surf stories, a lot of experience, and just a lot of stoke about, like, I've just got in, or I've just come back from Indo. There's all these stories flying around, and everyone's really sort of supporting each other and helping each other out to get in more often. And you see the stories, like some of the questions I ask will be like, "Who's been surfing last week?" And there'll be a bunch of, I went 7 times, I went there, and here's a picture, and you see some great surf stories. And then there's someone else going, "No, I didn't actually get in," and feeling a bit jealous about the other stuff. So it sort of drives that, like, I joined because I know I want to, but I can see other people can. And I think that's one of the big things. Sometimes we sit there and go, "Oh, no one could do that, no one could do that," but it's the evidence is thrown at you, like, other people can do it, so why can't you? If someone else can do it, you can do it.
And is that the essence of Surfers Life Club?
Yeah, I think it is really. I think it is. It's the same thing. It's helping people maybe more proactively. The community group is very much online and supporting through posts, and we have like a monthly session where people get together and chat, and we might have a guest and chat. You even may be a future guest, Rocky,
Well,
and just
there
chat
you go.
about their life journeys and the experiences they've had, and give their tips. And it might be, we've had Matt Bromley, one of the pro surfers who's been invited to the Jaws Invitational. He came on and sort of talked about his not really big wave surfing. He talked about his life journey. He's got young kids now. He's got one young kid. He's got another young kid coming, and he's going off to Jaws, invitational surfing Mavericks. So we really sort of explored, like, how do you process that in your mind, like the risk that we're seeing, like how do you look at that against the other things that are important to you? Surfing's obviously important, but it's not only surfing. So how do you find that balance, whether it's work-life balance or other balances about the various things that you want in life?
I will say this, with my own experience through my life of surfing, there was in the early years surfing almost every day, whenever there's waves. And fortunately, with Santa Cruz 300 out of 365 days, we typically have some swell.
You guys are lucky.
Yeah, we are very fortunate. We are a very fertile surf ground, and I don't take it for granted. It's just amazing to live here. And so I was surfing almost every day, lived right down the street, like a block away from the waves in Pleasure Point. And my girlfriend, who is now my wife, at the time, she was just teaching school, and I'd be doing personal training in the morning, surfing in the afternoon, doing a little bit more training in the evening, and then the weekends were made for surfing. And we had a surf shack on the back deck, and our back door opened right into the shower, so you could just walk in, rinse off, throw your suit on the deck, and go back to whatever you needed to do. But then the family developed, right? We began having children, and your responsibilities and your focus is more toward family and building that family. And therefore, my surf sessions, I noticed, got less and less. And for about close to 10 years, having two kids, I could pretty much count on both hands and feet how many surf sessions a year I was getting. So maybe, like you were mentioning, the individual who is okay with once or twice a month, I had to be okay with it. I didn't want it to be a long-term kind of thing. But as it turned out, there are priorities, and surfing was not at the very top. It was building that family. But now, fast forward, 6 years ago, got one of my kids on a board, and they just thrived. And for 6 years, for the last 6 years, I'm back to almost every day, but I get to enjoy it with my kids. And that in itself is remarkable. And so I just put that out there, because there's going to be ebbs and flows. There's going to be waves. There's going to be swell, and there's going to be flat days in your life. Right? There's going to be times where it's just epic, and you are there in the curl, just pitching down the line. Your legs are so sore because you've been on the wave for so long, and you eventually have to kick out. But then there's going to be days where it's just not there. And I think we can use surfing as a great symbol or an analogy to life in many ways. So I guess putting it out there to those that really want to work less, surf more, if there's things in your life that really need focus and are of utmost importance, there's got to be a balancing act. There's got to be a juggling. Like, did you find that with your kids when they were younger too? I mean, what was
to a degree. I mean, I was lucky like you. I was living in Costa Rica at the time, so I was about 100 yards from the beach, so I could still get in fairly frequently, and still sort of most days. Work was the biggest issue for me, actually, more than the kids. But I think that's exactly the problem that we all face, is that there are multiple priorities in life. There's more than one thing that we want, and it's trying to work out, how much time do you dedicate to each one of those things. And when we get zero time to dedicate to one of the things that's most, that is most important, very important to us, we become frustrated. The same as if you were surfing all the time and you didn't get to see your kids. you'd probably be really frustrated with that and unhappy. So it's sort of trying to find that balance. And I almost hate to use the word balance, because I think it's more sort of finding harmony between those different elements. Like I have to work now. I need an income. In theory, I'd love to serve all the time. I've got young kids, but putting the family time aside, it's still a balance between work and surfing. But because I'm getting to surf quite a luxurious amount most days for sure, I don't begrudge the time at work. Like the income's important to me. What I'm doing is important. I think it's valuable, and I don't begrudge that time. But if I had zero time surfing, I would probably learn to really dislike my current role and what I'm doing, because you just get frustrated with life. So it's trying to put a bit of time to each one of those, almost in sort of a percentage of how important is it. And it might not be that clear. And then, of course, as you say, you've got to deal with the ebbs and flows of swells and tides and that as well. So I don't think the challenges ever stop. I think if we're clear about what's important to us, and I almost want to ask you this, Rocky, looking back on that time that you mentioned where you didn't get to surf that much, I don't know if it was all because of the family or if it was work or what the other reasons were. Did you want to surf more? And actually looking back on it, could you have done a few things a bit differently and probably got in there?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, to answer that question, and then I'm going to come around to something you said earlier, but I think that most days I was quite okay with where I was, and being a good husband and father and focusing on family while running a business. So being a business owner and building a new family. And there was a side of me that felt like if I surfed any more than I was surfing, there was a level of responsibility I wasn't meeting. And that might have been self-conceived. It wasn't anybody else telling me that. But I just felt like, okay, this is all I can do in regards to following my passion while I've made this choice of creating a family. So yeah. And you know what, and coming back to something you said that fell on my ears quite heavily, was that I like how you use the word harmony over balance, because balance is really, it's a brief moment in time. If you achieve true balance, it's just this finite point that on either side is imbalance. So to think that we have to achieve balance is actually a disservice, because it is only for one moment in time, and then we're having to sway to the left, sway to the right in order to try and orbit around or find that central point once more. However, I can maintain harmony. I can be in harmony and yet have chaos around me. There's something about that. I really like that. And I think I'm moving on into the future, I'm going to use that concept of harmony much more than balance. So thank you for that gift.
No, it's a pleasure. Balance is such a big term and everyone talks about it. And I almost have to talk about it for people to understand where I'm coming from. But I fight against it, because I don't think balance isn't really what we're looking for, unless when I talk to you or talk to somebody else, it's exactly, I want 50% of this and 50% of this other thing. They're equally important. And it's 50% of my time on each. Like, you've got sleep, you've got your family, you've got all these different things. Like, you're never going to get proper balance in there. It's just finding harmony and having a bit of time for each of those, and a bit of time for yourself within there. So you're actually better when you do turn up and you're performing maybe at your peak, rather than stressed and angry and looking at the surf forecast.
Yeah, and so there needs to be an element that you are okay with, that you are at a point where that is acceptable, right? There needs to be an acceptable level, and again, to stay away from balance. But what is acceptable for one person may be completely different for somebody else. Like you said, that the individual who is okay with surfing once or twice a month, that's an acceptable range. If they found themselves going out every week, once or twice, Now that's gotten to the point that's unacceptable, or it's a little bit too much. So I imagine working with individuals, you've got to find out what their acceptable range is for all elements of their life, right? And whether you're looking at it as a pie chart or some other fashion. I mean, that must be a part of it.
Yeah, it's a part of it, but I wouldn't use the term acceptable. I think what are they actually happy with? Because we've got, like, often in life, you hear people and you ask them, oh, I've got to go and do this, or I have to go and do that.
Hmm.
Or yeah, that's acceptable. And I'm from England. So the British, I might ask a British person, how are you? And the answer might be, not bad. And you're like, well, can we go a little bit further? Can we get a little bit happy? So I mean, and language is a part of what I use in the coaching as well. It's really getting people to identify, what they want and therefore what they'd be happy with. And it's easier to be happy with some things if you understand that's not the only thing you've got these other bits as well. So if you can really get clear, and I think this is the biggest thing, getting really specific and clear about what it is you want and the numerous things that it is you want, and getting close to those, and some of each of those, you're much happier if you're at work or if you're in the surf. You mentioned about not enjoying the surf, not getting on well. If you were too stressed about the other elements, it's getting enough of those bits of time in those different areas and understanding the compromise. Like, it's ultimately you're going to make a compromise in those areas to allow those additional areas to thrive as well. So it's getting time in each one of those and accepting that. I used your word, accepting or even embracing that compromise. Like, I'm working for a reason, and I can see what that reason is. Part of it is to support my family, and part of it is to be able to go on that surf trip down to so or go surfing on the weekend. And if I get this done, that's part of my reward. And if you're only doing the stuff you don't like without that harmony into your life, it gets much tougher. And I'll be honest about it, people are unhappy. People are living lives that they're not happy with. And if we can get them to a stage where they're happier, or actually very happy, they're going to do better with their family, do better at work, and live better lives, be happier with their life.
Agreed. I mean, for me personally, there used to be a certain level of, I wouldn't say guilt. Well, yeah, we'll just say guilt.
I'd say
There was a certain
guilt.
amount of guilt. Like, I just went surfing when I should have been doing this or that. But then I turned that around and I realized that, when I go and surf, I become more clear-headed, I become more focused, I become happier, I have more energy. So when I'm back on the land, I have more of a purpose, I have a more focus, and I'm more driven. So I can get these things done because I took time out for myself to recharge out there in the water. And once that occurred, and I'm saying probably it was about, I don't know, maybe a decade ago,
I want to ask Rocky, was this before or after you were not surfing as frequently because of the young kids in the business?
It was probably just at the time that the kids were starting to surf again. Okay. It was right around there, just before, probably right around that time. And I realized, no, in order for me to be of service to others, I have to do the things that I'm passionate about, that give me joy and purpose, or else I become a salty curmudgeon and I just start seeing everything wrong with everyone, everything, and every situation. So it's a nice kind of, it's a spiritual recharge, while at the same time doing something physical and something I enjoy.
And to frame it, or another good analogy, I guess, is if you're on an aeroplane and they release the oxygen masks, we're all now very understanding. You put your own mask on first before you help anybody else. And yet in society, I feel, particularly as parents, as adults, and to fulfill society's expectations, and that goes back to primeval times. You try and help others because that's what's expected and that's what you should do, and you put them and those before yourself, but probably at the detriment of them, because you're not at your best when you're doing that. So to be at your best and to be able to really help, you've got to look after yourself as well. And those are all the things that you were mentioning there, Rocky, are sort of sitting on that other shoulder when you're on that deck of debate, going, actually, come on, you can spare an hour. So this is a question that I wanted to ask you, Rocky, because this so often comes up, and I think the guilt element is huge. Like, I shouldn't really, because I've got X, Y, and Z to do. And quite often you can go, and actually, if you can go in for an hour, and it's not going to make any difference to all those things that you've got left to do, other than you'll come back out feeling fresher and you'll get them done better and faster. So quite often that's where I start with people, like, all right, let's just get really specific about it. You're not surfing at the moment. I've worked with business owners, haven't surfed for a year, surfed all my life, at the moment own a surf shop. I can't get in the water, like really frustrated, angry with everyone, angry with everyone in the shop, angry with the clients, angry with the staff, angry about the whole thing. And actually, let's just ask a very specific question. Like, if you went surfing this week for 1 hour, you know, what would the knock-on effect be? What would fall down? Like, tell me truly, what would fall down? And actually, it comes out nothing. And then they give it a go and they go, it was fine. In fact, everyone seemed a bit happier.
Yeah, I had a client who was a professional surfer, and he was in my studio just finishing up a training many years back, and I just got word that my next appointment couldn't make it, so they were canceling out at the last minute, and the surfer turned to me and said, you know, a 45-minute session is better than no session.
Yeah.
And that's rung true for so long. So even if you have an hour free, you know, granted, you have to run to the waves, suit up, depending on where you are, I guess. But for here in Santa Cruz, you got to get your wetsuit on. You go out 45 minutes, you come back in, change out of your suit, and you're back to work. And 1 hour has gone by, and you're so much better for it. So I took his advice and went for that 45-minute session. And since then, that's rung true. Even an hour, right? It's no time at all. And it's what a great way to change your mindset.
Yeah, and a lot of it is mindset. Like, you can do these things, but you sort of create this blockage for yourself where you're just stuck and you can't. And it's so funny that you chose 45 minutes there, Rocky, because when I try and go a lot at the moment. I'm going a lot. I'm being lucky I'm succeeding, but often you can get, and I'll take you back to the deck of debate again. You can look at the surf and go, is it worth it? Is it really good enough? Am I going to go? I've got all this stuff to do. You're looking at the surf, and what I consider to be worth a 2-hour session, or, you know, I'm trying to squeeze in like a good 2-hour session in the morning, is better than what I consider to be worth a 45-minute session. But so I can change my mind about, rather than assessing the surf for like, right, I'm going to go in for 2 hours and that's worth it, or I can go back to go and get on with the real world. I can ask myself a different question, like, all right, is it worth it for half an hour, 45 minutes? It's quite often worth it, even if it's not that great. It's worth it for half an hour. Not only taking the time to go when you get there and the surf's not good, it's worth it for half an hour. And if you jump in for that half an hour, quite often you're there for an hour and a half. But you've got to get off the deck and get in there and not turn around at that point.
Well, this brings up something also, and we haven't spoken about this, but at least in Santa Cruz, I'm not sure how it is in your neck of the woods, but the crowd factor. You know, surfing has exploded, of course, in the last several decades, and
everywhere.
Everywhere. So every break, for the most part, is going to have a number of people. Now, here's my strategy with that: is like in Pleasure Point, there's a couple of breaks up there that you're going to have the most qualified, the most skilled surfers potting up at these takeoff spots. And not far down the beach, you're going to have more or less a beginner spot where people are primarily longboarding, but you'll get a few shortboarders in there, and they struggle to catch the waves and so on. So if I'm in a jam for a short amount of time, and my session's going to be, say, 45 minutes, I'm not going to go up with the skilled surfers, because the number of my wave count is going to diminish, because I've got to use etiquette, and which I always do, but I know that there's going to be a certain order, a certain priority, that you're only going to get a couple of waves, compared to going over toward the beginner intermediate spot, where you can start taking off on a wave, look over your shoulder, that person doesn't make it, and that wave is yours. And then on the way back, there's a little inside break, and I can get I kid you not, probably 20 waves in 45 minutes at the beginner spot compared to maybe 3 or 4, potentially 5 waves at the more skilled spot. So I bring this up because you could be one of the guys standing at the cliff, remembering what it was like 15, 20, 40 years ago when nobody was out there and you don't surf anymore, or you could figure out a way to enjoy the session, right? It's comes back to that mindset. Either it's too crowded, or how am I going to get the waves that I want in the crowd that I see here in a good manner? Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And I mean, it's funny listening to you. I reckon this conversation must be taking place around the world, but you know, I do the same thing. And we talked about it in the community a bit. And especially, I think, for the guys that have been surfing for longer and maybe aren't as fit and strong as they used to be as well. And they're like, I struggle to find the motivation to go in, and I don't like the Groms having a go at me. But what you did there was ask yourself that question. Like, this is what I want. So how can I do it? What are your options? And I think I'm not necessarily talking specifically around crowds, but we can do it with crowds. There's so many options that you could do. You could go to different breaks. You could ride different boards. You could get more flexibility in your time and go in at different times of day. You can find that more sort of remote peak at the main break where you go in and just surf that, and it might be a shorter wave, but as you say, you get more waves. You can start going off down the coast to more remote places. The list continues. If you actually start to think of options, so often we're just stuck with the challenge and we can't really think past the challenge, which is why we have these sort of negative cyclic thoughts that we lie in bed at 4 o'clock in the morning and can't shift. It just goes around in circles. But if we actually shift that to like, right, give me one solution, what could you do? And then once you've got to one, you've opened up new pathways of thought, and you can start to come up with other options. I mean, the crowds is a huge one. No one's really got the magic answers. You could build wave pools, you could have passes, all the things that you're actually seeing happening around the world. You can move to a different location, move somewhere more remote. Like there's all these things you could do, and then it's choosing, right, well, I've now got a list of 20 things. Like, which ones am I actually going to do and when, and put in place? And I can probably surf a bit more than I'm surfing right now when I'm just stuck looking at it, wishing for the past and not able to get in. And none of them are going to be perfect. The problem's still going to exist, but you maybe see it a little bit differently, and you've got a list of things you can do about it.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so we're coming up to, we could obviously talk surf for several more hours, but we'll have to do this again for sure. But Steve, tell me, if people want to get involved with your club, join the community, what are the best ways to pursue what you're doing?
The easiest and the best is probably just join the Facebook community. It's free. It's a private community as well. So like we talk about quite personal stuff within there, like what some of our personal challenges are. So it's private, it's exclusive, and it's a Facebook community. Work less, surf more.
Beautiful. All right. I'll make sure that the link is in the description below the podcast. But I've really had a fun time chatting, and it's good to know that there are people out there helping others to pursue their passions. And it just so happens we share the same passion. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks a lot, Rocky. Cheers.
Cheers.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Rockfit Files. I just want to thank Steve for coming on and having a great conversation. And remember, if you want to learn more about working less and surfing more and joining his community, you can go online at Facebook, and also just check the description below the podcast to find his links and how to get in touch with him. Until next time, make sure you go out and save me a set wave.